I may cut it here and talk about Libris Mortis. Libris Mortis is another book I wish that they do something. They did. They kind of did in 4th edition. They did Open Grave, which was basically like an update to this, except more limited. But it was 4th edition, so who cares? No, but Libris Mortis, another excellent book. Yeah, I'll probably cut it and talk about Libris Mortis. Yeah. Libris Mortis, 3rd edition book. This, as it says, the Book of Undead. Another book that was pretty much vital for playing necromancers in 3rd edition. Now, Libris Mortis, again, it's a DM's book, but it has stuff for the player. It is a book that I wish that I managed to do more in. The binding for this book is falling apart too. Only this time I can't blame it on age. I can only blame it on Wizards of the Coast. The 3rd edition stuff was usually better than this. I don't understand. Anyway, moving on. It does not cover necromancers per se. What it does, well, I guess it covers necromancers. It's got some of the classic necromancer prestige classes, and I'll get to them. But it primarily covers undead and undead-related things. So it starts with a talk about undead, and it talks about undead physiology and what they eat and how they live. And that's actually very useful if you're using undead, even if you're not using undead in 3rd edition, if you're using undead in another edition, simply because it tells you, like, what various types of undead are required to eat. And it kind of, it kind of breaks them down into certain things, because undead, as a rule, don't necessarily have to eat. Skeletons, what do they eat? Nothing. Zombies, what do they eat? Nothing. But then you get some things like vampires. Vampires have to drink blood. They have to drink blood, or they start getting weak and supposedly can die at some point. Ghouls. Ghouls have to eat flesh in order to survive. But then you get some that eat particular things, drain particular things. They consume particular things, but they don't have to. It's not required. They just do it because they're assholes. Or they do it because they're designed that way. My hair is thinning. I'm getting them widow peaks. And it just makes it look really ridiculous. Anyway, hey, I'm 40. What do you expect? I'm in my 40s. Okay. Okay, so basically this table breaks down the the undead that were in the game as main undead up to the release of this book, which is always a limitation. It's always a limitation when you're talking about these sorts of books, because they're only really, like whenever there's a table like this, it's only really useful up to the point at which the point the book is published. So they break it down into not required, which is basically stuff that the undead consumes because it wants to. Inescapable craving, which may not necessarily be needed for its life, but that it is driven to seek out. It doesn't do this, it doesn't drain this, it doesn't drain this stat, it doesn't consume this because it needs to survive, but it is driven to. Usually, it is paired with a diet dependent, which is what it needs to survive. Usually it is. Like vampires. Vampires have an inescapable craving for life force. But they also have a diet dependency for blood, which is basically, that's what it's tied into. But but those are not necessarily intertwined. The Alep, for instance, which really, 5th edition really, those of you who are familiar with it, the Alep is a type of ghost. And the Alep is a type of incorporeal undead. And it's one of those things that really bothered me for 5th edition in terms of what they changed on it. But I can see why they did it. The Alep is an undead, an incorporeal undead, that is the product, in earlier editions, it was the product of a suicide. And that's tragic. But if you're running horror, it's also something that fits in with some horror themes, because it is disturbing. Their special ability was that they drained wisdom, and as a result, basically drove their victims insane and urged them to also commit suicide. And that's a really heavy theme for a creature, for a monster. Alep is one of those undead. It's weird talking about it like this, and I'm sorry for the somber note, but it is really weird talking about this, because when you talk about monstrous undead in a fantasy game, people really don't get disturbed by them. Not a lot of people. Some people do, but it is really hard. Like, even though they are very, shall we say, very common in horror settings. You go to Ravenloft, you expect vampires. Vampires are classically a horror creature, but to our modern sensibilities, they're almost like romanticized. You have to really, really play your vampire in depth as a monster for people to take it as not just like, almost like a desirable thing. When you talk about zombies, people are like, ick, zombies. But very few people really take that as like a horrible thing. Talk about ghosts. You have to write a really tragic backstory for a ghost to have any sort of impact. Otherwise, people just assume, oh, it's just, another monster. Things like the nightshades. Those are the big, creepy giants from the negative plane of existence. They're scary, but they're not horrific. They're just monsters. Monsters that you beat for experience. But you throw an Alep in, and people start getting uncomfortable. And they were not used a lot as a result. I use them very sparingly, as it should be. But they were disconcerting. An Alep was more disconcerting to people than, say, your standard white or your standard whatever. Even though theoretically those could be, but an Alep, like the specifics behind an Alep, were genuinely disturbing to people. And it can, if you're running a genuine horror campaign, that can be a good thing. But in 5th edition, they changed them. And I'm really going off topic here. Let's go to Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Let's bust it out. Let's bust out 5th edition. Alep. Let's see what they changed the Alep to. I don't even know if they spread madness anymore, because the idea of madness and insanity being people are trying to treat mental illness with more respect, and I respect that. But what it has meant is that things that drive people... No, they've got a maddening touch still. They've got whispers of madness. But instead of like actually creating insanity, it just does psychic damage. Yeah, it just does psychic damage. Nothing like you're not actually driven insane by it. It's just psychic damage. And I can respect that, and I can see both ends of the spectrum on that. But it does, like taking like a madness-inducing attack, or the idea that something may induce a mental illness, it does take tools out of the DM's quiver, basically. I think they do have optional rules for that in, like, some of it. It's really only useful in a horror setting, and even then only sparingly. But the Alep, they changed it. When a mind uncovers a secret that a powerful being has protected with a mighty curse, the result is often the emergence of an Alep. So Aleps are no longer the ghosts of suicides. Aleps are produced because they uncovered something cursed by a creature. And that is still tragic, but it's nowhere near as tragic as the prior versions. And as such, it can remove some of its impact. Anyway, I got really off topic here. We were talking... That's some heavy shit, man. I am sorry about that. I would not approach themes like that in a game if I knew anybody in the game was uncomfortable with it. And if you don't know your players really well, it's best to avoid it altogether. And I'm saying that as someone who does not do like warning, this is going to trigger you. I do not do that, but still, that's heavy. That's heavy shit. That's heavy shit, and you should never do it. You should never spring it on anybody. And that's one of the few times you're going to hear me say that, because I am old school. I will really, really work to disturb people and horrify them if I'm playing a horror game. But that's one thing. That is one of a few things that I won't touch. And if there's at all any doubt that the player is going to have a problem with it, like a serious problem with it. Anyway, moving onward. It goes into undead outlooks. Moving onward, shifting gears, moving back onto the train tracks. It deals with, oh God. I open the book up again and I immediately see undead propagation. What kind of a heading is that? And it brought all kinds of ew things to mind. But it's basically talking about undead spawn. Undeads can create spawn. If you get killed by a vampire, you become a vampire. If you get killed by energy drain, you turn into something else. Talks about undead senses. That's always useful. It's always useful to know what your monsters are capable of. And this, like many books in the past, like the old 2nd edition, like I, Tyrant and things like that, it covers the physiology behind them. Undead society is weird, because this is about the time where they started talking about, like, entire undead cities. And that concept has existed in the past, but then they're talking about actually developing them into societies. They've got specific religions for undead, and it includes things like Nerul, which 3rd edition used kind of like a variation of the Greyhawk gods as their core thing. But it also has things like Dorasane, King of the Ghouls. Yeah, they basically gods or godlike creatures that undead might worship. And it includes Orcus, of course, because Orcus has to be in everything. Yeah, why does Orcus have to be in everything? He was like the primary mover and shaker of 4th edition in terms of demon lords. But I got a little overexposed because I'm also a fan of Frog God games, and they put Orcus in everything too. I love them. I love Frog God games, but God, give Orcus a break. He needs a break from kicking ass. And it gives you the requisite ideas on fighting undead, and that's useful. That is very useful. Even for other settings, because it gives you specific rules, but it also gives you like hints and tips that are useful regardless of what game system that you're using. Chapter 2 is character options, and what that means is feats. And feats in this book, some of them are really interesting, and some of them are not interesting whatsoever. But a lot of the feats in Libris Mortis are suited for necromancers. They give you all kinds of corpse crafter feats that let you add things to your skeletons so that skeletons don't suck so much. Zombies too. They give you like feats that boost the undead in your presence. They give you the most broken feat, which did not get broken until the release of Heroes of Horror, which is Tomb Tainted Soul. It lets the person that takes it heal with negative energy as an undead creature. And then it also opens up to some things that make you seem more undead. But it's kind of broken because in Heroes of Horror, you got something called the, what is it? The True Necromancer? No, the Dread Necromancer. True Necromancer is garbage, and it's in this book. This book has the garbage True Necromancer, but Dread Necromancer, which was like a spontaneous casting class that was like, I gotta admit, it was kind of Mary Sue-ish. I played one. I played more than one over my course of 3rd edition. You could like solo stuff as a Dread Necromancer. They could cause damage, like negative energy touch, like at will, pretty much. Gave them a touch attack, negative energy at 1st level. Boom! Basically do like, I think it was like 1d8 damage just by touching somebody with negative energy. And yeah, that basically meant if they had Tomb Tainted Soul, they could heal themselves. Problem solved. Soloer. Heal yourself, command undead, use spells, sitting back, profit. But I'm not going to get into that because I don't have a hard copy of Heroes of Horror. I have looked at it in the past, but I do not own a copy of it anymore. Some of my stuff got broken. Yeah, that's some interesting feats in here. I'm not going to go over all of them. Yeah, Profane Life Leech. It is a modification to your turning ability. And it lets you drain 1d6 hit points, steal 1d6 hit points from nearby creatures. It's an area of effect drain life, available to anything that rebukes undead. So you spend rebuke undead things to drain life from everybody around you. And I used it 0 times. 0 times. I put on 4 characters and I never used it. And you know why? Because I was always in a group and they always stuck around me. And I was like, back off, guys. I got this. And nah. So, got some other things in there. They got Undead Leadership, which is basically leadership, except with undead. I got Undead Familiar. Is that what it's called? I got Stitched Flesh Familiar. It lets you have your familiar be undead, which can be useful. It goes into undead cohorts and followers, which is important if you take undead leadership, because if you take undead leadership and you don't have any information on having undead followers and cohorts, then you, my friend, are what is known as shit out of luck. Let's see, you've got undead monster classes. Well, first it talks about undead mounts and the difficulty thereof. It covers things that I think some people don't necessarily, they do not necessarily think about. And that is, once you have an undead mount, like a skeleton horse, you love that skeleton horse as a necromancer. Got that skeleton horse. But they don't react like animals. You guide a horse with your knees. You got to train a horse but undead follow your verbal commands. So, and you can only pre-command them with a certain number of things. So skeletons, they've got like, and it says that you can only pre-command them with a certain number of things. It doesn't actually go into that. It's like up to the DM's discretion. So you've either got to find a way to pre-program your horse to respond to like normal riding commands, or in battle, you've like literally got to, like command them verbally. Okay, horse, stop. Whoa, horse. Things like that. And that can slow you down if you're also, commanding an entire army of undead. Now, it does talk about undead classes, and this is another thing I've only used once or twice. They have monster classes in Savage Species, and then they like barely touch them again. I think only this and like one of the planar books in 3.5 have monster classes. Monster classes basically break down a monster into a class you can take. So you can gradually gain monster abilities by leveling up this class. But you become that monster. And in terms of undead, it's weird. Because usually you cannot like get out of a monster class until you've finished its progression. Like if you had Savage Species and you became, let's say, an imp, or I don't know, is imp in Savage Species? Let's say you became like an ogre in Savage Species. You could not get out of the ogre track until you were done with the ogre track. And monster classes could be anywhere from like a couple levels long to 20 levels. In fact, I think there's a couple 20 level ones in here. Let's see. Is there a 20 level? Yes, there is. The Morgue is the only 20th level. The Morgue is an undead murderer. And they are pretty badass, but I don't know if they're badass enough to... Yeah, they're pretty badass. It's got a full 20 level advancement. If you're a Morgue, you are only a Morgue. But if you're like a Ghoul or a Ghast, because they're on the same track, you level up enough Ghouls, you become a Ghast. There's 8 levels now. So you can become a Ghast something else. A Ghast / something else. Mummies. Mummies have 13 levels. So you could eventually get out of Mummy and become something else. They're pretty well balanced. They're not great. They're not really well balanced, but they're pretty well balanced. In the next chapter, chapter 3, is prestige classes. Death's Chosen is like your minion. Like if you're an undead and you want like a guardian that can like guard you and be a minion, you can eventually give them Death's Chosen PRC levels, and that is it's a little bit of an addition. It can be useful. Death's Chosen, I never really used it for any NPCs, but they basically become bodyguards. You get really good at taking hits, and then you can jump in front of your master. Dirge Singer is one that I used as a PC when I was given the opportunity to, but I didn't do anything with it. It wasn't as good as I thought. A Dirge Singer is a bard, a 3rd edition bard, so don't get your hopes up. But they're a bard that can, like, basically start using their effects on undead. And then they eventually get the ability to, well, they can cause fear, and they can cause fear. They can cause horror. So they can, like, instead of only boosting their allies, they can dissuade their enemies. And there's also, I think there's something in there that they can use. I don't know if it's in this book or another one where you can use your song on undead. And then finally they can do the Song of Awakening, which basically raises a zombie. So they're like weak bard necromancers. Master Radiance is one I never used. I don't know why it would be... Oh! It's like for killing undead. It basically... I don't even know what this is. What the fuck is a Master Radiance? Master Radiance channel the pure, undiluted power of the sun. Often originating in a good-aligned druid sect that reveres the sun, they have a holy purpose to scour the earth clean of undead. So yeah, they're like druids that can like fire sunbeams at people. And druids can already do that. So they're just druids that are really good at that. Master Shrouds is another one that's There is a way to make this one really broken. Master Shrouds is an undead, or not an undead, it's a necromancer type class that can rebuke undead, that can then summon like immaterial undead, and they're based off of divine spellcasting, so they're kind of I mean, if you're a divine spellcaster, I guess they're great. But there is one thing where they can become like really super overpowered, or you can get into them real early. I think that's the broken part. Like, I'm not into theory crafting on 3rd edition. I guess that's why I always sucked at it. But you can theory craft a way to get a Master of Shrouds to summon incorporeal undead, which were really rough at lower levels, at really low levels. There's the Pale Master, which I ran a character in Neverwinter Nights as one of those. And never on tabletop. Pale Master's problem is that they sacrifice too much. I mean, they sacrifice... If Pale Master in 3.5, Pale Master in Libris Mortis is way better than the 3rd edition one. 3rd edition one sacrificed like every other level of spellcasting ability. Pale Master in this one sacrifices 1 level, so it's not bad. But the problem is if they boost melee stuff. but they require arcane casting. So it's like trying to make your wizard... If you try to make your wizard into a fighter, there are way better ways of doing that. You have to have a very particular spell layout to make a Pale Master worthwhile. Sacred Purifier, another one I never used. It's basically... Yeah, it's like a paladin almost, except just somebody that's really good at smiting undead. True Necromancer, that's the one where they tried to make a PRC that combined divine and arcane spellcasting, and did it with undead themes, and then completely botched it. Because you don't get a level of both classes at every level. You end up losing, I think, like 3 class levels, and you already have to have like 5 of each. So you only end up getting like mid-level spells. True Necromancer sucks. And the problem is that a lot of they get all of these neat materials, like, or all of these neat abilities, like create undead and rebuke undead and necromantic prowess, which basically, boosts their ability, their caster level with certain things. So I guess that kind of offsets the stuff that they lost. But if you want to do that, just not lose it in the first place. And then they get Desecration, which... Here's where the problem with True Necromancer is. Most of their abilities are things that they get as spells or would have got as spells if they weren't a True Necromancer. Think that over for a second. You sacrifice all this shit to become a True Necromancer just to get very limited amounts of it back. And that's why True Necromancer kind of blows. Even for an NPC, it's kind of eh. And then they've got a couple undead prestige classes. I'm not going to go into all of them. They're basically like prestige classes that boost certain undead abilities, but they're not great. They're okay, I guess. If you're making an NPC, they're okay. If you're playing an undead, you're probably better served getting an actual class. I get some additional spells. This is the book. Remember, I was talking about the summon undead spell in the complete necromancers, in the complete book of necromancers, and this is where they made 3rd edition versions of summon undead. And I think they actually had a version of those spells out before this. But yeah, it's summon undead, works like summon monster, except there's only like 5 levels of it, and it only summons undead. And it can actually be a little bit overpowered because some of the lower end undead is actually more powerful than its CR should necessarily indicate. Got some additional hunger, but I don't see anything that's really super evil in here. That's the problem. There's a lot of like mass versions of spells that were already available. There's a lot of drain life type stuff. Wail of the Banshee, which is, I think, just a version of a wizard spell. Yeah, it's just a version of a wizard spell. But yeah, it's all just... That's the problem. With 3rd edition, it became more about the combat. And there's very few spells that are actually just straight up, like, debilitating and evil, like there were in 2nd edition. There's the tumor type spells, like Necrotic Cyst, which creates like growths of undead stuff in your body that you can then use for other spells. But there's very few of those spells that are worthwhile. Ghoul Gauntlet makes a reappearance in here. So yeah, they did redo Ghoul Gauntlet. Let's see how it appears in this one. It's a 6th level spell. Ghoul Gauntlet. Ghoul Gauntlet, your touch gradually transforms living victim into ravening flesh-eating ghoul. They take 3d6 points of damage per round, so it works faster. And they become a ghoul instantly. And they go under your control indefinitely. And here's the thing with Ghoul Gauntlet, is that they kind of fucked up, because they had no limit on controlled undead in 2nd edition, which I don't think they did. At least not when you create them through spells. In 3rd edition, they did. And the thing about 3rd edition is that it sets a pool of undead that you can control with Animate Dead and similar spells. And I think it's like 4 hit dice per level. And Ghoul Gauntlet states that these ghouls that you create are considered to be part of that pool. But then it states that the pool is only 2 hit dice per level. So, read as written Ghoul Gauntlet for a long time. Like, if you knew Ghoul Gauntlet, all of a sudden it reduced your pool by like half. It reduced your pool of undead by half. So it was like, don't use Ghoul Gauntlet because you'll get nerfed. I think it was just, I think it might have been corrected later, but I'm not sure. I don't really see anything that's really super evil in this. That's the problem. Well, not really a problem. It's just there's not a lot worth talking about. It's like, the necrotic cyst stuff, it's like an entire line of spells, but it's not evil. It's just gross. I got Revive Undead, which works like Raise Dead, except on Undead, I guess. Yeah, there's Wither Limb is as close to really evil as it gets, and it basically duplicates what the Rod of Withering used to do. It just withers a limb, exactly as it says on the tin. Nothing super evil. In terms of magic items, there's some interesting stuff. Nothing is just straight up evil. Like, nothing is straight up debilitating as it was in the complete book of necromancers. It got a lot of stuff that acts as like poisons against undead. They got armor that will almost never be used. It's basically armor made of undead. So you've got like a ghoul shell, which is made of like ghoul skin. Or you've got literally just basically armor that's made of various pieces of undead. And some of it is really neat. And some of it really sucks. And none of it, you're almost never going to see it in a campaign. No DM is going to touch that. Let's see, they got the various types of damage that you can add to weapons. They just add more of those. Nothing really super. Yeah, that's a problem with 3rd edition. Again, it's all combat based. It's like, oh, let's see, what can we do for new weapon types? I know. Let's make a weapon that does negative energy damage. The best generic item in here, I think, is Rod of Undead Mastery. It doubles the amount of undead you can control. There's a couple interesting ones in the miscellaneous wonders section. There's Husk Globe. And that actually kind of reminds... I don't know what movie it was. Was it like Chronicles of Riddick or something? I don't know. Where it's been forever since I've watched that movie, so forgive me if I'm misremembering it. This item is basically a sphere that you throw a corpse in, and then you can question it. And it just keeps the corpse indefinitely, so it'll answer questions for you. Which can be neat if you're talking about like a necromantic society, and you've just got like these husk globes, like in a room where they could keep like their ancestral memories and shit. Nightcaller, which was in what was it? The same one with the tree that creates undead. What's it called? It's in the now I'm forgetting it live. Tales from the Yawning Portal. It's the first one in Tales from the Yawning Portal. I don't know which. It's reprinted in here. Nightcaller. Yeah, aside from that, nothing really. Interesting is undead grafts. There's a few of them. You can graft undead parts to your body, but these are neat, but the problem is that the prerequisites for doing them is just astronomical. So if you're going to do undead grafts, you better have a cohort that can do the stuff, or you better be just purely specialized for undead grafts. Gives you your standard new monsters. I think this is the one where like the big heavy hitters were listed, like the Atropal Scion, which is like the aborted fetus of a god. Spoiler alert, they cover that in 5th edition. Bleakborn, which are undead that are left out in the frozen wastes. Boneyard, which I saw as a bone swarm in in Pathfinder. Basically a bunch of bones that like animate and then go after you. Brain in a Jar is like one of the only good monsters in here in terms of thematics. That's actually from like the Ravenloft book back in 2nd edition. That's nice to have. I've used Brain in the Jar for things that it was completely not useful for. They got a lot of undead in here. And like the majority of them are typical 3rd edition variations on stuff. Got some templates in here that are useful. The Hooded Pupil I never really understood. Is a template that you slap on a monster to make it like a necromantic disciple. There's the Half Vampire. Oh god, I need to do like an entire RPG story time on my vampire from 4th edition. Yeah, I went there. Oh god. Mummified creatures. There were monstrous mummies in 2nd edition, and this just basically expands it so you can use them in 3rd edition. They're not great. Necromental is an undead elemental. They did a better job of those in the Ravenloft 2nd edition setting again. The Necropolitan, which was an interesting choice. I don't know who came up with this one. But the Necropolitan is basically like just an undead dude. It's like an undead person. They get like undead abilities, but that's about it. And the reason this is problematic is that it is a level adjustmentless creature template. Not really a template. It is a template. You can apply it to like any humanoid, I think. Or maybe any human. But instead of a level adjustment or anything like that, you just sacrifice experience as part of the ritual. So what you had was a bunch of theory crafters would do is if they wanted to have the undead abilities for a class that benefits from it, they would make their character a necropolitan, or they would immediately save up to do the ritual and then get the experience to do the ritual and then do it. It would put them a little behind their party, but since it wasn't a level adjustment, they'd eventually catch up, or nearly catch up. They would be like 1,000 experience behind or whatever. And then they'd have all the benefits of being undead for their particular thing. And all the penalties, of course, but it was just kind of stupid. There's the revived fossil. If you ever want to animate one of the displays at the museum, that's what that is there for. And I am saddened to say that I had a character use it. I had a character reanimate undead dinosaurs using a revived fossil. Let's see, anything else interesting? The Slaymate. It's like an undead kid. Which is tragic, I know, but they make it goofy in this. That's why that's another reason I don't like 3rd edition. It's like they took some of the stuff is really goofy. The only good thing about a Slaymate is that it boosts undead around you. So if you were an undead, or not an undead, if you were like a necromancer and you really wanted to like give your undead every single boost you could, you'd like piggyback a Slaymate and just have this undead kid just boosting everything around you. Swarm Shifter is a template that you use on mummies. And it basically, if you've ever seen like the mummy, from, not the new one, but from like, I think it was like the late 90s, early 2000s with Brendan Fraser. Might have been the late 90s, probably the late 90s. The part where The mummy. I can't even remember his name. What was his name? I'll look it up later on. Where he turned into like swarms of stuff. That's what the swarm shifter is in terms of a mummy in here, and it's really nice. It's a really nice template. Yeah, I don't see the weep. Weep is a type of undead that I've never used. Weep. They call it weep because it weeps, except they spell it with a H. So you can be like Stewie. It's a weep. A weep. A weep, and you can arm it with a whip. Basically, they're undead that have been created, and as part of the creation, the undead puts nails through their eyes, so they're constantly weeping blood. It's got interesting tips on running undead encounters in the next chapter, but nothing really game breaking. I mean, it's useful. I would say it's useful, but it's not as useful as the complete book. It is useful for 3rd edition, but the chapter on like the hints and tips is useful for 3rd edition. But again, it's all about the combat. It gives you some sample of ghosts, but none of them are like tragic. They're just ghosts, like the ghost template applied to monsters with some like basic background. But really, how tragic is your ghost ape going to be? I mean, like Coco died, like the gorilla Coco died recently, so I guess that's tragic. You could have a ghost ape wondering where her kitten is. And now I'm sad. Now I'm sad. The ghost Medusa. That's the thing, though. A ghost shouldn't be just a monster you encounter. It should have, like, a backstory. Svistith, Lurker in Darkness. It's a ghost illithid. The ghostly illithid Svistith, which is not an illithid name at all, lives in its own personal hell because it has been dead for so long it can no longer remember what brains taste like. That's not tragic. That's stupid. I got sample liches. I don't even want to look at these. It'll make me fucking rage. Yeah. Dahlia Thistledown is the nicest little halfling you'd ever want to meet. Scroll down to the thing. Female halfling lich bard. It's got her stats. What's her alignment? Does it even say her alignment? Like, I'm probably like ruining my voice here because I'm talking down in the book. I don't mean to do that, but does it even say her alignment? I'm not even seeing her alignment in here. I could be wrong. Oh, chaotic evil. Halfling lich bard. Thank you, 3rd edition. Yeah, let's skip through these. I don't see anything in here. I guess they're useful for people who just... Lich variants. The good lich. The lich fiend. I've got a bunch of skeletons pre-statted out. The Tyrannosaurus skeleton. Variants on skeletons, which then later got... I guess they're... I guess it's okay to have templates, but... It's just skeletons that move fast. Skeletons that are on fire. I guess if you want to reproduce Castlevania. I did that one. I'll talk about that in RPG Storytime sometime. I did the Bloodlord, which was basically my attempt to put Castlevania in a D&D game. Which is funny because it never actually got off the ground because it was like they had to get to like level 10 before they got there, and the party broke up shortly after getting there. Mind you, it was because of a stupid issue, which is well worth an RPG story time. Anyway. Yeah, and then they've basically got... Yeah, the rest is just samples. They've got like sample encounter areas. So yeah, Libris Mortis, good book. Not as good as Complete Book of Necromancers, but it was a good book, and it was a good way to boost Necromancers. I think I'm going to wrap it up here because really, that's all that's all the settled necromancy books I have on my shelf right now. And I know that's strange because I'm a person that really likes to put those out there, but yeah. Maybe I'll talk about other books again. Sorry if this RPG story time, it's been a long one. I've basically been chatting books at you. I've been basically paging through books, telling. But those are some of my favorite books of necromancy. Some of my favorite books for their respective editions. AD&D Second Edition, Complete Book of Necromancers, easily my top 5. A D&D Third Edition or 3.5. Libris Mortis, another, again, easily within my top 5. I hope they do one of them for 5th edition, although I doubt that they will. Because of the way 5th edition's been going. I don't think they'll put like a major necromancy focused book out, but who knows? Who knows? 5th edition looks like it's winding down in a few years. I hope they don't, but who knows? Anyway, on that note, I'll call it here. This has been the RPG Crawler with my RPG story time, and this is probably going to be broken into 2. I'll probably break it up so that each book gets like an hour. Probably a little more. Anyway, if you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye.